Well, I'm glad you're here today to begin this series. I don't wanna. Have you ever said that to God? You ever thought about something that God wanted you to do and you go, I just don't want to do that. I've had that experience a lot more when I was first following Jesus. I'd read stuff and I'd look at it and go, you got to be kidding me. I don't want to do that. And what makes it really difficult, I think, is that often it does sort of feel like busy work, for lack of a better word. It sort of feels like, why would you even care about that? Why do you want me to do that? And one of the things that makes it most frustrating is there aren't a lot of verses in the Bible where there are those, and here's the reason why. I mean, there just aren't a lot of those, thou shalt, and here's the reason why. If you do this, then this is what will happen. I mean, there's some of those, but to be honest, there's a lot of, God just tells us to do something, and it doesn't make sense, and there's no real clear reason why, particularly when we look at it in the 21st century, we go, that doesn't make any sense at all. And so as you're a follower of Christ, or maybe you're with us today and you're not yet even a follower of Christ, you're just sort of feeling drawn and you like some of the stuff about this place, and you have friends that go here, or you came with somebody and you like them, and it's not a bad thing to do, and it sort of made you feel better, but you aren't sure you really follow. And as you get closer and closer to thinking about being a Christian, you think to yourself, but what about all these rules? I mean, what do we do with all of those? And why does it have to be so complicated? And I don't know that I want to do all of that stuff. And again, there just aren't a lot of places in the Bible where God says, here's the reason why. And you sometimes feel led to, you hear somebody talk and you sense that God says to you, what, you want me to apologize? I don't need to apologize. They need to apologize to me. Like, I'm so sure I'm going to forgive them. Why would you want to do that? I don't even want to do that. Or you want me to operate totally ethically in business, like total honest all the time. I just tell the truth all the time when everybody in my world is unethical at some point. You want me to be completely ethical? That doesn't make any sense. I'm going to go broke. I don't want to do that. And once again, there just aren't a lot of those experiences where it just doesn't make sense to us, and we don't get the explanation, and he doesn't tell us why. And I realize, at least for me, sometimes even having the reason why, if you do this, and then this is why you've got to do it, even that doesn't make me, maybe it's because of my rebellious heart, even then, I don't want to. But often we just don't get why God wants us to obey. So in this series over the next few weeks, we're gonna talk about this thing of obedience. And I get, for some of you, you're here and you hear some of the stuff we talk about, and you're like, be sexually pure unless you're married to a person. I get where that works if you're 14 or you're 16, but I've been married and I'm divorced, and it doesn't really make any difference. Everybody in our world lives with somebody. Why would I even want to do that? Or you're in marriage and you're thinking to yourself, but she is never going to change. He is never going to change. And of course, they're looking at you and thinking the same kind of thing. And God asks you to move toward them, and you feel nudged by God that you ought to stay. You ought to stay. There's no real reason to get out other than that you're not necessarily as happy as you want to be. There's no reason. Maybe you sense God wanting you to move toward, being a Christian. You've been coming, and you've been feeling nudged to be a Christian, and you're like, hey, I'm okay with showing up at church, and I'll even serve, and I love doing those events where we help people in the community. But if my parents found out I was thinking about doing this, or my friends found out that I was even coming to this church, I know some Christians that, I do not want to be like them. But there's this hunger inside of you, there's this pull inside of you in your heart, and you're just feeling drawn. It's like God is saying to you, hey, why don't you just trust me? Why don't you obey me? Trust me. Obey me. Well, let me let you in on a little known fact, or at least it's one that we don't talk about enough, I don't think. This is such a big, big part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So we're going to talk about it for the next few weeks and learn from some people who are already been where we are. And this is so easy to miss, but it's so helpful if you can just get your mind around this kind of thing. God's ultimate goal in your obedience is not just to get you to cooperate. And what I mean by that, when God asks you to do something, His ultimate goal is not just getting you to do what he's asking you to do. He's after something bigger than that. I mean, you get it that if God just wanted you to do what he's asking you to do, he's all powerful. Lightning works pretty well. He could make you do what he wants you to do. But God's goal in our obedience is something bigger than that. He's after something bigger than just getting you to comply with what he's asking you to do. And this is such a huge part of what it means. I mean, God's saying, my ultimate agenda for you as someone who's following me, my ultimate agenda is not just trying to get you to fit in line and us all be little clones and we all obey the same set of rules because those are the rules. God's saying, my goal for you is way beyond that. It's way bigger than that. But God's after something that we don't always see at the beginning, and we wind up saying to him, I just don't want to. So what I want to do to start this series off is I want to show you an account in the Bible. It's one of my absolute favorites. In fact, it's found in 2 Kings, and this is such a good, big passage of Scripture that I'm actually going to talk about this for the next couple of weeks. But this passage illustrates, so that we can start this series, this whole idea that God is after something more than just your cooperation, but we often miss the connection. Now, let me just start off by reading to you what this account says. Now, Naaman, that's the guy's name, one of our key components of this story, was a commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. So, the nation of Aram, and just so to get you your idea of geography, Israel, if this were the Mediterranean Sea, and here Israel's like right here, and Aram would be up northeast of that a little bit, in sort of the area of Syria, and they were enemies of Israel. So here's this guy Naaman. He's like second in charge of the whole nation. He's in charge of the army. He's the second most powerful man in the country of Aram. And on one of his raiding sort of parties, he goes down into Israel, he attacks them, and he brings back some slaves. And one of the young girls from Israel that he brings back becomes like a household servant. She becomes very close to his wife, and I think begins to think of Naaman and his wife sort of as mom and dad, as parents. And when she hears that he has leprosy, she says to Naaman's wife, hey, there's a prophet back in Israel, and I know if we could get the master to him, he'd be healed. Now, to be honest with you, that can't sound like a great idea to Naaman. Hey, I'm going to send you, you got a deadly disease. Why don't you go to your enemy and see if your enemy would heal you? But when you're desperate, anything's worth trying. So he goes, the next verse says, Naaman went to his master and he told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, or about 12,000 ounces, 6,000 shekels of gold, or about 4,000 ounces, and 10 sets of clothing. Now, I know the clothing seems a little out of place to us with the gold and silver, but in a day when, you've got to spin every piece of thread and you've got to weave everything together, clothing was exceptionally valuable. Most people didn't have very much clothing, so it was a big part of what they're sending. So, he sends him off, the king sends Naaman off to their enemy Israel with a letter to the king of Israel saying, hey, this is my friend, I want you to heal it. And the very next verse says, he says, so when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and he realized he was in trouble. Now, here's the reason he sends the letter to the king. In their day, here's the way they thought about God. You got a God and I got a God, and there's a God, and then there's king, and then there's the people, and then there's the dirt, there's your land. So there's a God, and you got a God, and I got a God, and then there's our king. He's right beneath God. In fact, a lot of the kings thought they were God. And right beneath him is all the people, and then their land. And when we have a war, we determine whose God is the most powerful, because if I win, my God beat your God. And it's sort of interesting in this that even though Aram's already won over Israel, they come to the other nation's God because their God can't do anything about leprosy. So he goes, this is the most powerful man in my country, sends a letter. He comes to the king of Israel, and the king of Israel, when he reads it, he knows he's in trouble. He tore his robes and he said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See, he's trying to pick a quarrel with me. See, what the king of Israel thinks is, this is all a setup. He knows I can't do anything about leprosy, and this king that already has beaten us once is just trying to pick a fight. He's brought all this stuff, but he sent the commander of his army down here saying he's got leprosy, wants me to do something. I can't do anything. When Elisha, who's the prophet that we've been told about, when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. Why have you torn your robes, or why are you so distressed? Have the man come to me, and he will know. And this is the important part. In other words, when I'm finished with this man, he will know something he doesn't know. Then he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Now, you got to use your imagination, I think, about this a little bit. They come first to the king, and we don't know how far Elisha lives from the king, but let's just imagine he's a little village outside the capital city, close enough that they know that the king's torn his robes. And now the king sends him off. Elisha said, hey, send him to me. And now here comes Naaman. And you're standing in, Elisha's village, and you're out sweeping your porch, and all of a sudden you see a cloud of dust off on the horizon. And the more you watch the cloud of dust come closer, you notice, oh my goodness, it's horses and chariots. It's the Aramean army. And you think, like everybody would think, well, they've already beat us once, they're coming to kill us again. So you go back inside and you get your whole family and you go run from your house and you go hide somewhere in a cave or off in the bushes somewhere, waiting just so they'll pass so that you won't be killed. So when Naaman gets to Elisha's village, the streets are deserted and nobody's around, and he comes to Elisha's house, and when he gets there, there's nobody. And then Elisha doesn't even come, and I think this had to be seen as an insult by Naaman. Naaman's a powerful guy. He's used to being treated with respect. Elisha doesn't even come out to greet him. He sends a servant to say to him, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. And then he went back in the house, and that's it. Comes out and he says, hey, you came, you want to get healed of leprosy? Go wash yourself 7 times, and you'll be healed. And Naaman thought what you would have thought. He's like, what? I come here with all this gold and silver and all this stuff, and you didn't even ask me about any of that? And the prophet himself doesn't even come out? I could crush this whole nation. I'm only here because I took one of your people back as a slave. I could take every one of you as a slave. And you send a messenger out to me? And Naaman, he immediately thinks what you would think. And what we often think when we hear something from God that doesn't make any sense, which is, well, that didn't make any sense. And I don't want to go wash in some dirty river. I'm not going to do that. I don't see any connection between what I came here to get you to do and this thing that you've asked me to do. I can't see any connection, and because I can't see any connection between this thing and what you're saying, because I can't see a connection, then there must not be a connection, and I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do it. Naaman said, I thought, that is, I had this expectation. I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abanar and Parfar, the rivers of Damascus, better than any of the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and he went off in a rage. See, he says, what you often say when you hear a command from God. See, I already had it figured all out. I came here to be healed, and I figured the prophet would come out to me, and I'd tell him about all that I'd brought, and he'd feel honored by that, and then he would honor me and tell me how the great guy I was, and he would do, he'd call out in a loud voice to God, and he'd say some religious mumbo jumbo, and he'd wave a hand over me, and then I'd be healed, and everybody'd be happy. But he didn't even come out to me. This doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense. So since I don't see any connection between what I'm being asked to do and what I want, it doesn't make any sense, and I don't want to do it. Hey, God, I'm lonely already, and you want me to ask him to move out just because we're not married? Hello? How is that going to make me less lonely? God, I'm 30-something years old, and I'm still single, and you want me to break up with her? I mean, I get she's not perfect. I mean, I know she doesn't believe in Jesus like all we're supposed to, but God, she's like the last train out of town. And you want me to break up? I don't want to. I mean, do you see my dilemma? There's no connection. I mean, I came here and I asked you for something, and you asked me to do something, and there's no connection, and it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm already in financial trouble, and I come here every week, and I write down that I need a job, and I need financial help, and I get a job, and it's not a good job, and I keep praying and praying and praying. God, help me financially. Help me financially. I need a financial miracle. And I keep praying for that, and you want me to give? That doesn't make any sense. Why would I do that? And because I don't make it doesn't make any sense, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. Well, fortunately, Naaman has someone in his life. He has a friend in his life, like I hope you either have now or eventually have in your life. You have a friend, he has a friend who sees beyond his anger and doesn't just come in his distress and go, I know, you're so right. He has a friend who sees beyond all of that and tries to bring some logic into Naaman's emotion. Naaman's servant, which all of his friends are his servants, he's the second most powerful guy in the country. His servants came to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? Hey, Naaman, if this guy had come out to you and he had said, hey, to be healed, what I need you to do is I need you to go out and give all of your stuff away to the poor. Hey, you know what you really need to do to be healed of this? You got to follow that yellow brick road and go get me the broom of the Wicked Witch of the West. I mean, if he'd asked you to do something great like that, if he'd asked you to give away money, I mean, you came prepared, and if he'd have said, hey, that amount of gold and silver isn't enough, I want more than that, wouldn't you have done it? And he goes, yeah, I guess I would have. Saying, well then, why won't you do this little thing? Why wouldn't you do this thing? Just because it doesn't make sense? Why won't you do what he's asked you to do? See, God has asked some of you to do something. And you come and you pray, and you aren't sure how it makes any connection, but you feel nudged, you feel urged, you continually come back to this thing. And it seems like a waste of time, and it seems stupid, but the truth is, the longer you stay in your circumstances, nothing's getting better. So finally, Naaman listens to his friend, and he just decides, I don't want to do this, I'm going to do it. So he went down and he dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored, and he became clean like that of a young boy. Now let me ask you, if you had a terrible disease and you knew you were going to die and there was nothing anybody could do for you, and somebody said to you, hey, go way down yonder on the Chattahoochee and dip 7 times and you'll be healed. Even though that didn't make any sense to you, wouldn't you do it? See, you look at things and you think, that doesn't make any sense. I don't want to do it. But he finally does it. And the next part is the good part, not the part about him getting healed. Because in the next part, we see what the plan was behind all of this for God. Because God has something far bigger than Naaman's obedience at stake. And with you, there's something bigger than just your obedience. It's far bigger than just getting you to comply. Because, I mean, you and I, if we had all power like God, we could get everybody to do what we wanted. It wouldn't even be that hard. It's not your obedience that he's after. It's something far bigger than that. And then it often takes us doing something that's really unusual, asking us to do things that don't seem to make any sense, that God has to get us to that place where we're finally willing to say, okay, that gets us to the agenda that God wants. Look at this. Then Naaman and all of his attendants went back to the man of God, stood before him and said, whoo, I've been healed of leprosy. Let's bottle this water and sell it. We'll make millions. No, he stood before him and he said, Now I know. Before I didn't know. Before I had heard, before I wondered, before people had told me. But I didn't know. Now I know. There is no God in all of the, not the land, not this country, not this nation. There is no God in all the world. I didn't even come here to learn that. I wasn't even wondering if there was just one God in all of the world. I came here wanting to be healed of my leprosy. But now I know, before I didn't know, now I know there is no God in all the world except in Israel. You know what God's agenda is with our obedience? It's not controlling your behavior. I mean, again, that just, you get it. It wouldn't be that hard. God's agenda in our obedience is when my faith, which is, okay, I don't think this makes any sense, but I trust you. When my faith intersects with God's faithfulness, in that intersection, it's not that I get what I want. That intersection of my faith and God's faithfulness, I experience God. In that moment when my faith, that is, I'll do what you asked me to do, it doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to do it because you said it. When my faith intersects with God's faithfulness, I come away and I know God. When your faith in God's faithfulness intersects, something happens. And you don't go home rejoicing over the fact that you got everything you want and everything's great. You don't even tell people about the fact that you don't worry anymore and everything's going on. You tell about the God of the universe that showed up in your circumstance, and you talk about the fact that God knows me. And God came into the details of my life. The God of the universe is with me. That's God's agenda. It's not controlling your behavior. It's not getting you to comply with some list of rules. God sent his Son into the world so that he could have a relationship with you. And getting you to trust him. I mean, every relationship is based on that thing of trust. You can't have a relationship without trust. Because God knows in the moment when we finally said, okay, I'm going to trust you. When our faith intersects with that and he comes through in the moment, something happens in our relationship. We know that God is with us. Naaman shows up and he just wants his leprosy to be healed. And he leaves knowing God. He didn't even show up thinking he had a spiritual problem. He didn't know there was anything about God involved in this. It was his circumstance of leprosy that brought him to God, and it's his circumstance that he wanted so badly to be healed, and God asked him to do something unusual, and when he finally said, after saying, I don't want to, when he finally said, okay, in that moment, God was faithful. He changed his circumstance, and he changed Naaman. Naaman knew God. And I have to say, he didn't know what hung in the balance. Naaman, when he stood there and he was so mad, he said, I'm not going to do that. He didn't know what hung in the balance. He thought it was his leprosy that hung in the balance. But what hung in the balance was him knowing God or not. And I just have to say to you, you don't know. We don't know. You don't know what hangs in the balance. We think we do. We think if I do this, then this. You don't know what hangs in the balance because you don't know what God wants to do in and through you when your faith and his faithfulness intersect. Listen what happens here, and this is not the end. I'm going to talk about it next week, and it's so good, but this part is so cool. Naaman says, hey, please accept this gift. Please accept this gift that you come. Now that I know God, accept this gift from your servant. Here, I've got gold and silver. I brought clothes. Accept this gift. And Elisha says, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept this thing. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. If you will not, said Naaman, please let me, your servant, be given as much of the earth as a pair of mules can carry. Why does he want earth? Why does he want dirt? I mean, what's going to happen with that? For your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. This is Naaman saying, I believe. I believe. I mean, if I believe, and if you will give me some dirt, I'm going to carry it back home, and I'm going to take this dirt because I know God's here with this dirt. I'm going to take this dirt, and I'm going to cover up my dirt, and I'm going to worship on that dirt because God is the God of the whole earth, and I am forsaking every other god. There'll never be another god because there is only this one, the Lord God of Israel. See, he didn't know what hangs in the balance. But what hung in the balance was him coming to know God. And he really only had a little bit of faith. Honestly, he had to be talked into it. He just had a tiny little bit of faith. But when his faith intersected with God's faithfulness, everything changed. That's what the Christian life is like. Over and over and over again. It's not a one-time thing. I mean, it's not an annual thing. It's not a month thing. It's not a daily thing. But it's a regular thing. I've had this happen many times in my life. And even as I was preparing for this message, I was thinking to myself, and I've taught this before, I was thinking, God, the next time, I'm just going to obey quickly. But every time for me, it's another one of those, that doesn't make any sense. I don't want to. And there's fear, and I don't see how this fits, and I don't know why I'd have to do this. But when my faith finally intersects with God's faithfulness, I remember God is with me. God knows me. And everything changes. And in the moment, I have to remind myself, Ed, you don't know, you do not know what hangs in the balance of you doing what God asked you to do. I've had several of these in my life, but I've had two that have really been life-changing for me, and I don't have time to tell you about both of them. I'll tell you about one. Many of you know that Becky and I moved here 26 years ago, almost now, to start this church. And at that time, in my early 30s, some of you heard this, I was just at the point that I just about to give up on ministry. I mean, I just felt like it wasn't for me. I felt like I had a call from God that I should do something, but I just felt like I couldn't make it work. I had started a church, and I screwed that one up, and it was all messed up, and then I had gone to this, traditional church. Imagine how that fit me. And I stayed there 7 years. And by the end of it, I was just miserable. And I was ready to do anything. I was ready to do anything to not have to keep beating my head against that wall. And a friend of mine who was a good deal older than mine, he was in his 50s at that point, he came to me one day and he just says, hey, there's this group of people down in Coweta County. And I know you don't really know where that is, but it's not terribly far from where you are. And they've tried to start a church and not been able to make it work, and they have a little bit of property, and they're willing to sell it and give up complete control and try to start a church. I think you ought to go down and talk to them. And really, only because I just respected him so much, just because he had been a friend to me, I said, okay, I'll go. And I came down here, and I talked to those people, and they did seem like they wanted to do something. We had multiple conversations where I would try to push the wildest things I thought would happen, and I had asked them to make sure that they were on track with it. And they told me, hey, we want to do this thing. And they promised that they'd pay me $36,000 the first year as a salary, and the previous year they'd all together only collected $20,000, and it just made no sense. And to move down here, Becky and I have these two little kids, they're under 3, and we have never lived in a house that we own. We've always lived in church-owned property, and now we're going to have to come here, and they don't have a house, and we got to buy a house, and I didn't make enough money before to have any kind of down payment, any kind of savings. We've got to come here. We've got to get all of this done. And we move here. And then the last 26 years happened. And I had no idea in the moment what hung in the balance. I had no idea what God was going to do. I had no idea all of what was to come and what God was going to bring about. God has been so faithful. But it all came down to me just saying, okay. Becky and I prayed, and we prayed and prayed, and we just felt like we were led, even though it didn't make any sense. And now I stand back and I look and I think of all that I would have missed, all the people I'd missed, all the things that I would have missed. I had no idea what hung in the balance. But I want to ask you, just think about it. What if God had come to me and said, hey, Ed, don't worry about it. It's all going to be okay. Church is going to grow, and people are going to like it. People are going to come that never been to church together before, and your kids are going to love it, and your boys are going to grow up, and they're going to be so sold out to what God wants to do, and they're going to love the church. Your grandkids are going to grow up in the place. You're going to have friends that will change your life. If he had told me that, I'd have said, okay, let's do it. I'd have packed at the moment. But think with me of this. In that moment, if God had told me all that was going to happen, you know what I'd have been looking for at every moment? I've been wondering when. I've been wondering what was going to happen instead of depending on God to get me through and to do the next right thing. God says, whoa. I'm not telling you all that. Because here's what God does. When God points you to the future and says, here's what will happen. If you just do it, here's what will happen. You know what God loses in the moment when he tells you what will happen at the end? He loses your attention. He loses your focus. Because you get focused on the end result. But in the moment when you have to just be faithful and say, okay, God, I'm going to do it because you asked me. And you're waiting for his faithfulness to show up. He has your undivided attention. And you come to know him. I mean, for some of you, if God were to say, hey, if you break up with him, look over there. You're going to get him. You'd go like, well, dude, he can get out. For some of you, you've gone through a divorce and you're hurting so bad and you don't know what the future holds, and God has said, hey, it's going to be way better in the future. Just trust me and do the right thing. You've been okay. But in the moment when you have to trust and you just do what God says and you don't know what's going to happen and you're waiting for his faithfulness to show up, you come to know that you can do the adventure with God. And he has your undivided attention. So let me talk to you for a few moments about next steps. Would you grab your connection card for just a moment and go ahead and put your name and either a phone number where we can text you or call you, in a way that we can email you. And then on the back, before you put in the offering in just a moment, would you look at the part where it says next steps? What I want to ask you is, what has God been nudging you to do? What do you sort of always come back to? I mean, is it to forgive someone? Is it to trust him and not to just be angry? I mean, are some of you so angry and people keep telling you about your anger and how it's ruining your family and how it's going to destroy your kids, and you see these classes that we're offering, or you got struggles with money and you know you need to get it right and you see what we're offering? I don't know what God's trying to get you to do. Why don't you just do it? Do I know what's going to happen? I don't. But I know if you'll do what God's urging you to do, when his faithfulness shows up, you will know God. You'll know that he cares about you and that he knows you. For some of you, for some time, you've been feeling led to follow Jesus. And your next step is to say that publicly, to be baptized. So on the right side of the card, there's a place that says, I want to make Jesus leader of my life and be baptized. If you'll check that, we'll help you in that decision. Whatever God's asking you to do. Would you just decide in this moment? He can be trusted. I don't understand why he wants this, but he can be trusted. How smart is your God? How wise is your God? How loving is your God? How willing is he to be with you? If you want to know what God is up to and all the things that he's asking you to do, you have to come to the place where you just say, okay, I trust you. And when his faithfulness shows up, then you will know. Let me pray for you. Father in heaven, thank you for the opportunity to know you. And I pray for people who are right now in that moment where they're being asked to do something that doesn't make much sense to them, and they're pushing against it and they're resisting. God, would you help today to be the moment where they just say, okay, I still don't get it, but I'm going to do it. Father, would you give them the courage to go ahead and do that? And when your faithfulness shows up, give them the assurance that you are with them. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for his love for us. In his name I pray. Amen.